Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is James Devine, and I'm the Exec Director of HR and OD at Medway NHS Foundation Trust, which is not too far from where we are now, about an hour from here in Kent. I should start by saying thank you to the Global Equality Group for inviting us to speak about this research, which was published about 18 months ago in the HR News Journal. And I don't work directly in equality, but actually my view is that equality is part of all of our role. And whilst we have experts in the room, as we did this morning, it's actually all of our role to play a part in the equality agenda. And from a personal perspective, I think this morning really showed that there's still a big debate to be had. There's still lots of discussion to be had. And we heard that we're still talking about things that were the things we talked about 10 years ago or more. And Lookism is a relatively new term, and some of you will be more familiar with it than others. But we use other terminology like unconscious bias, which you're probably more familiar with. But start by thinking, what is Lookism? And there are various definitions, but this was the simplest, which is that it's a prejudice or a discrimination purely on the grounds of somebody's appearance. So when we talked about 2 years ago now about doing a piece of research, some independent research, this wasn't linked to any academic study. It was just something that we, myself and Paul Coulson, who's the HR manager at Health Education England, were interested in. Is Lookism something which is a factor when it comes to recruitment decisions? And you'll all have friends and family, I'm sure, who say that they don't judge. And I would challenge that, because we do. It's human nature that we do. And in this research, we wanted to better understand what impact those judgments or those prejudice or those discriminatory thoughts and views had when it came to recruitment decisions. So the aim of the research was twofold, really. Initially, it was about better understanding, but actually, again, I was talking to some colleagues earlier. What we wanted to do, secondary to that, was how do we then use those findings to support the education and the training and the development of equality. And what I'm really pleased about at Medway, through the head of equality that we have there, is that we take a very educational approach to equality and diversity. I think when people get things wrong, when they use wrong terminology, when they use terminology that's offensive, you can separate those two people around those who intend to be offensive and those that don't. And it's those that don't, which in our experience is the majority, and our role is to support those people and educate those people. And we're beginning to use some of this research and other wider research to how we then educate people around the equality agenda. Oh, there's something happening there. That's not part of the research, I should say. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. So again, some very clear objectives. And again, this was simply about a case study approach to just under 100 recruiting managers at an NHS organisation in London. And this was really about how important are appearance factors in making recruitment decisions. So as I said, it was a case study online. It was anonymous. And the reason why we did this, as I said, is we were interested in it. It wasn't part of an academic study. We weren't forced to do it. And actually, we had great buy-in from the organisation that we did it with. And we've taken their details off the slides and off the research. But actually hugely appreciative to the organisation, but also those recruiting managers that took part. Often when you do research, and you'll know this, when you do a case study, you always hope that people will reply, because if you don't, often it kind of invalidates that research. So we're really pleased that we had just under 100 recruiting managers. I'm not going to go through all of the research, because we've got about 15 minutes for this, and then some questions, and then handing over to some colleagues who take you through their fantastic research as well. But I want to just pick out three core parts of the research. So you can see here, there were 15 questions in the research, and we wanted to really uncover not just things that were already protected by the Equality Act in terms of characteristics, but what factors in terms of appearance or judgment aren't covered by the Equality Act, because I'll come on to why we did that in a second. So first question here was, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely would they be to take appearance into account? And would you all agree that when people walk through a room in an interview setting, you have an instant view within probably 3 to 5 seconds. Okay, it could be the colour of their hair. It could be, if you're going for an interview at a bank and you're wearing trainers, for example. It's these types of appearance views that we all have, and that's human nature to have those. And you can see here, most people felt that it was important. Appearance was important when you go for an interview. The next question we wanted to focus on was, when you take appearance into account, did you then base your recruitment decision based on that? And you can see a big swing in the other direction. So in one breath we say that appearance is important, but in the next breath we say it has nothing to do with the recruitment decision that we make. And this is what we wanted to do in unpicking some of these research findings. This is what I want to spend most of our time left, which was, there were 2 questions within the research where we tried to unpick, as I said, those parts and those appearance factors which are not currently covered by the Equality Act 2010. So we asked for respondents to say what characteristics would they take into account that had a negative impact on the decision-making process. And you can see here, and again, we've got the data that sits underneath this within the full research, which we can make available. But what factors had a negative impact or a negative view when people came through a room? And you can see the big one, which was a standout one actually in the research, was a visible tattoo. In a recruitment setting, so this is in the NHS, we didn't go into the type of role, but this was, if you had a visible tattoo, it had a negative impact from an appearance perspective. If you had a piercing, and perceived smell is, if someone looked unkempt, for example, that would be the factor there. People's clothing, and then how much makeup a candidate wore. So these are all really important factors that they felt had a negative impact. The 5 lowest responses, as we've recorded there, we picked a number of characteristics and asked people to rank them. So when we see that they're 5 lowest, we force people to rank, okay? So yes, they had to rank things like race, age, gender, but actually the factors around those was very low, which meant that they weren't factors when it came to making a recruitment decision, you would think, but I'll come on to that in a second. The next question was the opposite, which is what are the positive factors? And you can see here, if you look good in terms of your clothing, if you have nice teeth or a nice smile, these are factors. And again, you might think, as we said at the beginning, if you come through a room, you're looking nice and you're smiling, you have nice teeth, there's a view that's formed, and this research shows that. Hairstyle, colour, and age. So age was the only protected characteristic which came up in either positive or negative when we asked people to rank. So, what we wanted to unpick here was, were people simply giving us what they felt was the right answer or a true answer? And that's why we asked often the same question in the research, but in a different way. So you go back to my slide with the first chart where I said, is appearance important? And overwhelmingly, most people said yes. Do you make recruitment decision based on appearance? No. Clearly the opposite. But you can see from the characteristics that people are picking up that clearly appearance is something which is genuinely important when it comes to making recruitment decisions. So how can it be such an important factor, yet the survey that we gave didn't really decide one way or the other whether people were giving the answer that they felt they should give? So is age a factor? If you were going to an IT startup and you had to have a view about using apps, you might have a view that actually someone in a younger age profile would be more akin to that type of job than an older. And it's those types of factors that we wanted to try and uncover with this research. You probably know who this is, I hope. We want to pick up tattoos because that really came out of the research quite strongly. And 1 in 5 people under the age of 40 now have a tattoo. And that's because the work that ACAS did and others have done is that celebrities like David Beckham and others have normalised and popularised tattoos. You'll see in this instance, if you were wearing a short sleeve shirt to an interview, you would very clearly see those tattoos. In the music industry, you have people like Professor Green who have tattoos up their neck. Now, if those people walked into your environment now for an interview, would you form a view? Because you have to think about your patients. So in our case, our patients are ill, and we have nurses and doctors and other healthcare professionals looking after them. What would their view be of someone who had lots of tattoos or lots of piercings? And this is a debate that we wanted to get into when it came to this research. So just to summarize, because we're running out of time, it was very clear to us that there absolutely were characteristics that were hugely important when it came to appearance being a precursor for role suitability. We very clearly showed, and as I said, you can look at the research, there are 15 deeper questions which show lots of data underneath it, which evidence to us that if you have visible tattoos and piercings in particular, they do have a negative impact on a recruitment decision. Within the research, we also talked about gender, because there's lots of research actually about gender and what roles are more prominent in when it comes to gender. But as I said, I only wanted to pick out tattoos and piercings today, just in the interest of time. But we were very clear, and the research shows that if you have a visible tattoo and a piercing, that will have a negative impact in the context of the organisation that we did this research in. So let's leave you with two very last slides. So we're not born to stereotype. This is something, and today is about this, isn't it? This is about us educating ourselves and educating others around us in our organisations. But there's a really important quote which came up throughout the research, which was a paraphrase of a Bob Marley quote, which is, if you're going to judge and point fingers at first, of course, you have to make sure that your own hands are clean. So thank you very much. Okay, we have to have a couple of minutes of any questions, if anyone has.